Hello and welcome to Adapt with Danette F-M podcast. My name is Danette Fenton-Menzies and we are currently recording season 2 of our podcast, and we are talking about collaboration and problem solving. And today we are talking to Winitha Bonney, and I like to call Winitha Winnie because she's a friend of mine. I met Winnie a couple of years ago through a group I belong to called Thought Leaders, and Winnie has a really interesting background, but we'll talk more about that shortly.
Absolutely. And I'm the podcast producer here for the Adapt with Danette F-M podcast, and very excited to get into this conversation because before we even sort of touch on anything, Winitha is an Order of Australia medalist. So, you know, that's the highest honour you can get in this country. So, I mean, we're absolutely delighted and stoked to have her on. She's also been on the Magical Learning podcast. So if you like this episode, you can actually get a lot more of her. But before we get into anything, we've got to highlight that this is a companion podcast to the amazing book, The Adaptable Leader by Danette Fenton-Menzies, who is also Danette F-M, who is also going to be running all the conversations today. So you can learn a lot more about adaptability. Danette, I don't think we've actually touched fully on what the Adaptable Leader is this season. So do you just want to quickly run us through what this book actually is for our listeners if they want to sort of learn a little bit more about it?
Yeah, good idea, Jez. So this is a book I wrote to really help support leaders to be able to thrive during uncertainty. So includes my model, the accepts model. And that stands for we need to be authentic, we need to be curious, we need to collaborate, we need to experiment. We need to problem solve, we need to transform, and we also need to be sustainable. So season 2 is really about two of the elements from that accepts model, the collaboration and also the problem solving. And we are having a lot of good discussions with people from different backgrounds about collaboration and or problem solving, depending on their preference in the conversation.
Absolutely. And I think today, just talking to Winitha, who's, you know, sort of works really in the diversity and inclusion space, but I haven't actually included either of those words in the episode title because I wanted to highlight one of the key points that she's going to make throughout this conversation that you have with her, which was amazing, but it's about how innovation and collaboration are related to diversity and inclusion. So if you don't really see that collaboration, this is going to be an amazing eye-opening chat. Before we get into the actual conversation you had with Winitha, did you have anything else you wanted to mention, Danette?
Yeah, so some of the things that I really liked about this conversation is the importance of diversity and inclusion. So if everyone around the table that you're trying to collaborate with or problem solve looks the same, sounds the same, has the same sort of backgrounds, then you're not going to get that innovation that Winitha really highlights. The other thing is just looking at who is designing the collaboration and the problem solving. Again, is it diverse or is it very much sounds like me? And I think the other thing that she really highlighted here is it's no use having diversity and inclusion if you haven't created psychological safety where everyone's able to speak up, feel heard, and when we make a mistake, we use that as a learning opportunity rather than a blaming opportunity. So great conversation. Jez, was there anything you wanted to add before we go into the podcast?
I don't think so. I think let's just let the listeners enjoy this one. It's a little bit of a longer one, but I think it's full of a lot of info. So I think this is a really good one. I hope you all enjoy, and we'll see you on the other side.
So we'll start, and I'll start by saying welcome. And Winnie, and this is Winitha, but I'm going to call her Winnie because I love that name and I love Winitha as well. Do you want to introduce yourself and just tell our viewers and listeners a little bit about yourself? Because they won't have seen you through the Adapt with Danette F-M podcast. They may have seen you on the Magical Learning podcast.
Yeah. So as you know, my name's Winitha, and I have a real interest in diversity and inclusion. So, I mean, at a fundamental level, that is really about social justice and human rights. And that's some work that I do at the moment. As a person, I am really obsessed with personal transformation and business transformation. As Danielle Leslie said, inner worker makes the business work. And so my work, even with diversity and inclusion, is not just about how do we create better outcomes for our people and for our customers, And it's also in the quest for in creating better outcomes, how do we lift performance as a business, being the people business, the business of serving our employees, and it's our employees that help us serve our customers ultimately. So I'm different to other diversity and inclusion practitioners in that I have a really strong foundation of business knowledge and across different sectors. And even with some of the DEI practitioners that I've been mentoring, that's the one thing that they've been able to gain from me is understanding the corporate context and understanding how things work, and therefore how does DEI fit within that, and about how ultimately how can we leverage DEI to lift business performance.
Love that answer. And I should have said at the start too, this is season 2, and we're going to be talking about collaboration and problem solving. And your background, Winnie, that I love that diversity and inclusion. And for me, when I was writing the book, it was like, how do we get more of the voices, and often the quieter voices, or the voices that aren't listened to because maybe they don't look or sound or feel like the norm. And when we get the norm, we get the group thinking and stuff like that. So this is why I invited you as my guest, because I was so curious, because I know you've got such a great background, and I just thought you could help our listeners and our viewers learn a little bit of how do we do collaboration and problem solving better. So I am so grateful you've joined us today. And I'm going to start with question 1. And this is really just, what have you seen or experienced that helps you with collaboration and or problem solving?
So with collaboration, it's, is it a real collaboration? So the one thing that I tend to see that gets overlooked and missed is that people are invited to the table, but it's, a table that's on the side. It's not the main table. And that's not a real collaboration to me. That's more having a consultative approach. Even that, when I dive into that doesn't really feel purely consultative. It seems more of like a tick the box exercise. So particularly in the community sector, where we see a lot of, for example, people from government, people from service providers coming together with people from the community, as a collaboration process, they may call that a co-design process. It isn't really collaborative in nature, because ultimately the decision lies with a bunch of people that is not representative of community. And that's something that community is getting really fatigued about. And by community, I mean people who identify and groups of people that have been historically and socially discriminated against and marginalized, who are in need of greater equity and equality. And so if we're going to bring people particularly to the table, and particularly when they're not being paid to share their lived experience and the expertise of their own lived experience and bring that to the table to collaborate and solve a problem together, if they don't have decision-making power, that to me isn't a real collaboration. From a business perspective, because I do work more with like retail and fashion clients who are in, textiles and clothing and footwear. And the thing that I really see is that they love a collaboration. And I really double down on that, because how are you doing that? How are you doing that collaboration? Are you going out to community, or expecting community to come to you? Even that, there's questions around equitable, processes. Are we expecting people to come to us rather than we go out to community? And, even if someone's collaborating, like a First Nations artist is collaborating on, for example, a shoe design, what's that process like? Because often what we see is people will be brought in to, design an item, but ultimately who is designing if that item goes out to production or not, and how are those processes and those decisions being made. So yeah, when it comes to collaboration, I don't see a lot of collaboration in the true sense. And when it comes to problem solving, I think people like the idea of bringing people in, whether they are open to listening to people's perspectives is different. So a lot, something that I'm dealing with at the moment, which seems to be a theme in my practice, is that leaders will always say, "Oh, there's no problem. Everyone feels included. There's psychological safety. We do have diversity. People do feel the sense of belonging," and that is absolutely untrue. And it's difficult to have that conversation when I don't have data to go to them with. And people pulse surveys and people and culture and engagement and well-being surveys, safety surveys, like do not provide enough information for us to go to the leadership team and say, there is a problem. That said, they're most likely not hearing that there is a problem because the whole issue is a problem, which is a lack of psychological safety. People don't feel like they can go to the leadership team and say, I have a problem or there is a problem. And so, what I tend to see is a lot of leaders and leadership teams that are problem avoiders, and they will look at problems from the sense of maybe business performance, financial metrics or market share growth and things like that. But even within that, there's a lack of ownership over and accountability over what was my part and my role to play in this problem. There can be a lot of politics at the table, people offloading that, that's because of your area and your decisions and stuff like that, rather than people really coming together and functioning really well as a team. And I think just as a human species, we really struggle with ownership and accountability around problems. There's a push against problems as well. I have a lot to say about problems, Danette. There's a push against problems.
That.
Yeah. There's a real push against problem as well. We don't like the emotional discomfort that comes with problems, acknowledging there's a problem. And for me, that's the most frustrating thing, particularly working with senior leaderships and teams and executive leadership teams, because there is an avoidance to seeing that there is a problem, seeing the value of, if they acknowledge there's a problem, my response is great, fantastic, that's amazing. Now, what are we going to do about it? Because the first thing is, it's like Alcoholics Anonymous. The first thing you must do is admit that you have a problem. And so when it comes to businesses and leaders, there is a real lack of ownership and accountability over the problems that we currently have, but also not seeing it from oh my God, another fire to put out, but more from the perspective of opportunity. Because when we look at some of the biggest problems like financial crisis, like I remember 2000 and 2008, like some of the most amazing businesses were born out of a moment of crisis, out of a huge financial and economic crisis. That's where some of the best innovations and ideas came from, because people had no other opportunities, no other avenues, and they were forced to think really outside the box. So there's so much value in problems. And I think as a society, as a human race, there's real avoidance around problems. I believe that we are obsessed with comfort. We know that growth happens with discomfort. And at the same time, we are absolutely obsessed with comfort. We can see that with technological advances. We can see that in the modern world. We are removing all the friction from our life. And what we have is a human race that is unable to deal with friction. So that was a lot.
Love that answer. And, just that whole, and you're totally right, I see as well, that whole thing about we want to be comfortable, and yet, like I see this with coaching clients where when they're really comfortable, their life is numb. Mm-hmm. Versus when you get into that discomfort, you start to feel alive. It's uncomfortable, and it's like we're working towards something that if we stick with it, we could maybe make a huge difference, and it's an opportunity versus let's avoid this. So, I love this discussion.
Yeah. Well, I was rereading Tony Robbins' book. I think he wrote that in the 90s, Awaken the Giant Within. And I want to go back and check this statistic and see where it's at. But back then in the 90s, he was saying that, like the US only has X% of population of the whole world and yet consumes 50% of the world's cocaine production. And now we've replaced, I don't know if we've replaced, and we know that, we talk about digital devices being digital cocaine. We talk about sugar and the addictiveness of sugar, and sugar is in almost every kind of food. Even I was walking past a pool and I spotted so many people on their phones, scrolling. And if I go on public transport, I see people scrolling like nonstop. And so we have a real discomfort with discomfort and an inability, a lack of individually resilience. I don't know what it is, but a real inability to sit in discomfort and to see the opportunity in it.
Love that answer. And I love that book by Tony Robbins too, Changed My World. So my next one is, I'd love for you to share something that you've perhaps experienced where it was either poor collaboration and or problem solving. And what were the impacts of them not doing it in a way that could be really helpful?
Yeah. So I could speak to this more broadly without giving any specific examples. And so what I tend to see is a lot of businesses that launch products with First Nations artists. So they launch like a product line. And when I look on their website, so these aren't clients of mine, because if they were my client, we were doing things the complete opposite way. And so when I look onto their company, you can generally see from their annual reports if they're publicly available or from information online, they're doing very little to no DEI work. They don't have a reconciliation action plan. And there's no evidence of them doing any cultural work. It doesn't mean that they're not doing it, but, from what I can physically see online as well, digitally, haven't done any cultural awareness or cultural safety training as well. I also don't know the specifics of that collaboration and what that looks like. So, one of the best collaborations I have seen is by, I think it was Breville. So they did a collaboration with I think a First Nations community as opposed to one singular artist. And they documented the whole process, which is uncommon. So a lot of brands and businesses will do that, which I am kind of two-sided about. One part of me is it's good from the perspective of being very transparent about the creative process. And the other side, it feels very showy. So particularly in the retail product sector, we see a lot of businesses that love shiny, beautiful videos of look at us and look on what we've done. So on one side, it's very transparent about the process. We can see that visually. We can see the artist. We can acknowledge the artist. And it's really cool part of storytelling. At the same time, it does feel a little bit tokenistic and performative as well. So with this company, the thing that I liked about them that they did differently is they had financial data on the collaboration. So the profits, I might be getting this wrong, and my brain is telling me, which could be wrong, that all the profits, so when you deduct all the expenses, all the profits were donated to a First Nations organization, and which is also not uncommon sometimes, although we do see a lot of the profits going back to the business. And if not, then I hope that maybe there is a licensing deal in place. Whereas this organization, this business, they had the financial data available in terms of revenue, in terms of expenses, in terms of money that was being donated and that was being updated. So it was full transparency, not just about the creative process, but also in terms of dollars and where were those dollars going to. And that's a really big step that people miss in the collaboration process. Because in those processes, not only are you collaborating with an artist or with the community, you're collaborating with communities, right? So people that are interested in those products, even for me, when I looked at those products, I went online to have a look. There are things that I want that I may not necessarily be at the table, and how, when you have millions and millions of customers, like how can that be possible for their voice to shine through? But there are some things that we know, like customers value transparency, customers want honesty, customers want to know where their dollars are going. They want to read that. They want to know about that. And so that's probably one of the best collaborations that I saw. And the problem that they were solving was around, even from a product-based, I can't speak on behalf of them, but from my perception, it's, these are everyday appliances that are in people's house, and it's storytelling. And it also keeps First Nations as front of mind. So every time you use the kettle, and it's got artwork, Indigenous artwork on it. It is a constant reminder. It's keeping that front of mind. It's a conversation starter. And importantly, it's building skills with community, and also giving back to community as well. So that's one collaboration that I saw that was done really, really well. Another one is out of the UK, and it's still pretty early days, but it's called The Outsider's Perspective. And there's a couple of global luxury brands that have come on board to provide job placements for Black, Indigenous people of color to work in the business of fashion. So what we've seen is a lot of people work as a designer, as a creative, as an artist, not so much working in these companies. So in these companies, there's a huge gap, a huge diversity gap around who's making decisions over what we put on our bodies. And so this is a collaboration between these brands and a designer and community around, there's an accelerator program, and then there's paid internships as well. So people are put into jobs for a period of time so they get experience, skills, and hopefully maybe a job offer as well. And that's specifically solving that problem of a lack of diversity within these global luxury brands, of which BIPOC folk are very large consumers.
Two great examples, and I remember seeing that Breville partnership. So, and it stood out to me, and I love, I didn't think of it at the time, but even just watching As Your Kettle Boils and seeing that reminder is just, I love it. It makes it part of the daily life, and just starting to make those connections. So thank you. So my next question is, based on your experience, what tips do you have for others, including young people, around developing your problem-solving and collaboration skills? And the reason we included young people was, one, Jez suggested it as part of it, but also there'll be a lot of people that are starting out in their careers. And obviously these are skills that if you get good at, you can have a huge impact in the workplace. So I'm curious, any tips you've got to share?
So when I look at skills of the future, problem solving, creativity are always in the top, and they have been trending at the top, and particularly when we see technological advances with, AI and other innovations, there is more and greater emphasis on the human brain and its ability to solve problems with a sense of creativity and empathy and emotional intelligence as well. Whether AI can mimic that, I don't know. I saw something on LinkedIn today and which kind of scared me, but anyway, that's a conversation for another day. When it comes to young folk, I think, I think with every generation, there's a different set of problems. And so on one hand, we have greater, for example, awareness around mental health, and yet young people is suffering, I would say, greater levels of mental health challenges than maybe my generation. And so the ability, the economy goes up and down. Housing affordability, life affordability is another challenge. The ability to solve problems, if I bring it back to a fundamental level, it's that life is hard. Life is extremely hard and difficult, and it was never promised to be easy. There will always be problems thrown your way. And so your ability to solve problems rather than be broken by your problems, is absolute key. According to the Gallup Strength Finder test, my number one skill is actually problem solving, and which I'm very proud of. And that was born out of necessity of, how do I get myself out of the situation? So rather than be consumed by self-pity and depression, anxiety, and brokenness, it was, how do I get myself out of this situation? How do I create a better life for myself? How can I create an even better life for myself? How can I be a better role model to my nephew? How can I give back to my community? How can I change the world on a global level? And so the ability to problem solve is really key, because a lot of the times, like you said, we often look for different things, places and situations and people to numb us from feeling that discomfort, when the real long-term opportunity to remove discomfort from our life is actually solving that problem. Avoiding the problem is not going to make it go away, or it will actually make it worse. And I think particularly for young people, with the world tracking as fast as it is, and we also don't know, because I'm sure my generation before me said the same thing about my generation. And so all I know is that the world is getting more complex. And so our ability to solve problems, to also survive and give back into the world, is really key. Particularly when it comes to young women, I get very concerned about, a lack of body positivity on social media and how that impacts them. These are all situations that we can consciously and unconsciously find ourselves in. And so the ability to recognize that, see it as a problem, and in terms of the lack of body positivity and the impact that it's having on us, and being able to diagnose it and then solve it for ourselves, to liberate ourselves, I think is really, really key. The world is also burning, as you know, and there are many problems in the world. And I really believe our next generation is the answer to that. And there are some really big problems to solve. And so, even when it comes to leadership and challenging those in leadership, because it's very clear and very evident that the old way of leading is not working. One of the core reasons is because the same kind of people keep leading. And so we really need our young people to really challenge the status quo, to break the status quo, and to redefine and recreate a new way of leading, and to put different people in those leadership positions as well. So there are really some really massive problems in order to maintain peace and harmony and environmental sustainability and inclusion in the world. And they're all problems that need to be solved. And so it starts very granular at a self level. And if you can develop the ability to solve your inner problems, imagine the impact you can make on a global level.
Love that answer. And I really like that, because it does start with our internal work. Because if we can't master ourselves, it's really difficult to then have huge impacts, because those voices in your head, the self-doubt, etc., can really play out and keep people small when, every single one of us, from my perspective, have some amazing gifts, but not everyone gets to show them. And sometimes people opt out before they're even asked, if they're asked. Yeah. So I love that. Now, I'd love for your favourite example of whether it's problem solving and or collaboration, and why it's your favourite example. And it could be the Breville one you talked about before, but you might have something else that doesn't have to be a big one. But I'm just curious, what's your favourite one?
So my favorite one is the story of Madam C.J. Walker. So Madam C.J. Walker, there's a documentary now available in her life. And well before that documentary came out, many, many years ago, I was looking for stories of inspirational Black, Indigenous, or people of color, women of color, that experienced hardship in life and overcame that. And I was looking for inspiration for myself. And because I can't find, even till today, it's very difficult to uncover those stories, because the same the same archetype of what is successful and who is that person that overcomes problems and challenges is the same archetype of a person. And so you have to go digging. And so that's what I did. And so I didn't want to look at today. I wanted to look like 100 years ago, 200 years ago, when things were a lot more difficult back then, when colonialization was really at its peak. And I found this story of Madam C.J. Walker, who was I believe at the time she was a single mother, and she was a Black woman in the US in the 1800s. So in inclusion, we talk about the double ceiling or even the triple ceiling. So she was a woman, and she was also a Black woman. So in the 1800s, women's rights were still being fought for. And I believe at the time she was born, slavery was technically abolished, and practices of slavery was still in practice, was still around. Lynching was happening. A lot of really huge atrocities were happening in the US, in Australia, and all around the world, even though the British Empire had technically said slavery is not okay. So she was born into that time when that move for civil rights hadn't yet started. I believe she was born in like 1860 or 1864, sometime around there. I think just as slavery had just gotten abolished. And she was a woman. So she was someone that experienced a huge amount of adversity in her life. When we look at it in the context of today, even though today we still have a long way to go, being a Black woman living in the US in the 1800s. She was, I believe, a single mother at the time, wanting to put food on the table. And so the problem that she had was, with textured hair, you cannot use the same products and utensils as, for example, Anglo-Saxon hair or Asian hair, which is different, has a different texture. And so she created a range of products. I think she was exposed to some products that were around being used in community. And she started to solve her own problem of, I need to put food on the table, and I need products that are specific for me and my hair texture. And in doing so, in solving a problem for herself, she ended up solving a problem for hundreds of other Black women. Not only her business, she was the first self-made millionaire in the US was not a white woman. It was a Black woman. It was Madam C.J. Walker. And I love that. I love that the first self-made woman was not a white woman. It was a Black woman who had double the amount of atrocities and maybe triple the amount of atrocities and barriers and lack of equity and access to even funding and to basic human rights than a white woman. And she managed to become she worked hard and to become a millionaire. And the intention was to give back and serve her community, particularly to Black women, specifically to Black women. And so she provided so many Black women with jobs, but also she, as part of their working in her company, she also taught them how to start and run a business. And she also taught them finances, how to manage money really well, because she realized that this is about, I guess, through her own journey, that this is about financial freedom, and that when we are financially free, we have more liberty. When we are not financially free, we experience more inclusion, more discrimination. Life becomes a lot more harder based on the exclusions and discrimination that we're currently, and the lack of human rights that we're currently experiencing right now. So I love that she, in solving this problem for her and her need for hair products and for getting more income and being financially free, she was able to liberate so many other Black women as well. I believe her house, which is a mansion, is still standing today. And now her story is documented through film. And most of it is true. And it's a wonderful, very inspirational movie to watch.
I love that. And I had heard her story before, and I loved how you've just told it. And, to your point that it's still not equitable, I remember on International Women's Day, I read an article that venture capitalists provide about 2% funding to women, and primarily that's to white women. And if you're a woman of colour, it's virtually zero chance of getting venture capitalists. And that's like, how do we create, because often women are really great business owners. They often work with community and those around them because they want to support not just themselves, but many others. So what a great inspirational share there. Thank you so much, and a great reminder. I'm going to watch the movie because I haven't watched that. I just read about her. So thank you. So we've come to our final question, and is there anything else you'd like to share that would help people around building their collaboration and or problem-solving skills? And is there any resources that you think might be helpful for people, including you might have some resources on your website?
Yeah. So I do like to publish, articles and small thought pieces on LinkedIn. So that's probably the best place to have a bit of a look around and a bit of a read. The work that I'm really interested in is by Michael, I think his name is Michael Easter. So he wrote this book called The Comfort Crisis. And even if you just simply listen to some of his podcast, I mean, it's very, very, it makes a lot of sense about what's going on right now. And so I feel like, the two biggest problems of problem solving is the lack of awareness about what is a problem. Even at a global level, we're seeing that because we have social media, we're able to see a little bit about what's going on in the world. And what people don't realize is that this is not new. It's been going on for a long time. Ukraine, Palestine, been going on for a long time. Congo, even my ancestral home, Sri Lanka. Like, a lot of people don't know a lot of what's actually going on in the world. I love Sophie, who we both know, and she's we talk a lot because Sophie has had international experience and has lived in other countries. And so I feel like she's someone that gets it and understands it. And I feel like in Australia, not a lot of people have traveled maybe to Vietnam or Cambodia or Thailand or Taiwan or Philippines or Bali, Malaysia, Singapore, maybe even China. And they haven't really traveled and gone and seen the world. So there's a real lack of awareness about globally what are some of the problems that exist in the world. Even the other day, I had a family member buy, one of those jumbo packs of like potato chips where it's got like lots of little packets, mainly like for you. I guess anyone can use it, but people tend to kind of use it for kids' lunches, put it. And they bought this gigantic pack that had like 20 mini packets. And I looked at it and I'm like, that's a lot of foil. That's a lot of foil.
Totally.
And I'm like, I don't know if that's recyclable. And that is because I am aware of this massive problem that we have around global warming and climate change and just, how much the world is suffering. I took my nephew on a walk the other day with my dog Bubbles, and we did a 15-minute walk, and I was looking and I was like, look, there's a cigarette butt. There's a cigarette butt there because we live close to the beach. Well, I live close to the beach. And so I am very protective of the ocean, being an island gal as well. And I hate seeing cigarette butts because I'm like, I know where that ends up in. There's a place in Sri Lanka where they have, enormous sea turtles. And they have a sea turtle in a tank that's floating. And the reason why it's floating is because it's filled with plastic. So if a sea turtle is floating, it's going to die
So
because it's
sad.
consuming plastic.
Mm.
And so for me, like not to get to sort of, all down and negative, these are opportunities for us to solve. And what I would like to see is businesses built around solving global problems for everyone that benefits everyone, not creating and contributing to that problem. So for example, I would love to start a fashion line. I would love to start a streetwear line. And the thing that's holding me back is the world doesn't need more clothing. Now, I would love to do that. And I think that would be super fun, maybe stressful, super fun. And it's a dream of mine. And the world doesn't need more clothing ending up in land piles in Ghana and in South America that you can see from a satellite
Yeah.
out in outer space.
Yeah. Well, I would love to see what you would create. And I'm thinking of a bookstore in Melbourne where it's run by two young students, I think they are. They're from overseas, and I can't tell you exactly what country, but they wrap their stuff in recyclable paper. So when it comes to, rather than being in a plastic bag, it's in something that you can recycle. And I love it. And I love getting their emails because they're supporting people from overseas, people of colour, to highlight their books rather than mainstream, which is often white. I'm thinking with your clothing, could it then be used, as maybe carry bags eventually or something like that, so it continues to add value and be used in different forms?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things. I mean, it's all complicated. Like the more that I dig into it, for example, even when you recycle clothing, the fibers end up and the dyes and the chemicals end up in the waterways. And that is actually affecting hormones and fertility. And I know this to be true. That's a contributor. There are probably many contributors because now people in their 30s are doing IVF. Huge numbers.
Yes.
And so that's one. We live in a very fast fashion world. We're depleting the world of resources. And I feel like the answer is really around reuse and repurposing items. So there was this one company, I think it's Homey, that had a collection of items that they didn't sell. So they, in retail fashion world, they call it dead stock. I don't know why I call it dead stock, but they call it dead stock.
What a great name.
And they brought it back to life. So they were able to, with their manufacturer, to redesign, remake, and to resell as a new collection with tweaks on it. There's another designer that I'm inquiring with at the moment for my own self about taking items that I have, cutting it up, adding embellishments, to make it into completely different clothing, rather than purchasing new clothing and stuff like that. Yeah, so there's many problems in the world that can be solved, and the art is going to be in who we collaborate with. I really believe the answers for the future of the world lie particularly with Indigenous folk, and in terms of caring for country, caring for the earth, caring for people as well, and to help redefine leadership too. And that's going to require us to collaborate in a way that's culturally respectful and sensitive, and that's safe as well. And I think it also, I really believe that it really starts with awareness that there are problems, awareness that those problems can be solved, and awareness about who can we collaborate with to solve those problems effectively. And in terms of collaboration, it's about doing things in a very non-egocentric way. So even in my work with community and even with B Corps and purpose over profit businesses, there's still a lot of ego that comes at the table. Look at me, I'm saving the world. Look at me and look at all the good that I've done. There's one leader of a particular charity organization who I have complete disgust for because of their behavior.
Yeah.
And the reason why the board doesn't remove that person is because of their celebrity-like status, and therefore their ability to draw in funds and donations, because they're scared about if this person leaves the organization, which they should, because of sexual harassment and so forth.
Oh.
They are fearful of this charitable organization, the people that we help will collapse. So they're putting it under the rug. And that is a board that is responsible for governance. I had a very similar situation with my last job, the CEO position, where I was being sexually harassed.
Wow.
When I was a general manager by the CEO, and the board ignored that problem. And I had to escalate and escalate and escalate and escalate and escalate. Eventually, the chair changed. And when we started progressing with removing this person from the company, the old chair knew that there was a problem. Why? Because they wrote 7 pages of evidence.
Wow. That's so cool.
But they were a woman. They refused to acknowledge that there was a problem because how it would affect their reputation. Because in their tenure, they had let go of 2 other CEOs. This was their 3rd CEO.
Wow.
So she has 2 young girls. She was more concerned about her reputation than what was happening in the workplace to me and to other young women.
That's so wrong.
So there is a real lack of awareness at a leadership level about the problems that are going on.
Yeah.
And that is what irritates me and gets under my skin, because we have one life, and that one life is so short. There is a post that has been going around on social media on LinkedIn. It started on LinkedIn. It's been screenshotted and shared on social media. But this beautiful young woman who passed away, I think she might have been in her 20s or 30s, so young, and had a really aggressive, could be cancer or some other illness. And every now and then I'll see it pop up, and I'll go to LinkedIn profile, and I'll click on her photo. And I think her life was cut so short,
Yeah.
And, what impact are we going to have in this one life? We don't know how long that's going to be. We really, really don't know. Like, I went to Bali a couple of months ago, and I emailed a client. And then whilst I was in Bali, I was like, why haven't I heard from him? Why haven't I heard from him? That's really odd. Maybe I was a bit too friendly. you know, because I don't just send my clients work emails. I send them, oh, look at this. I read this. Oh, I like this. I'm like, oh my
Nice.
God, I saw this bag. It's gonna be so cute for you, blah, blah. And I was like, why didn't he reply to me? And then when I was in Bali, I heard that he'd unexpectedly passed away.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And so, you know, life is too short for us to be walking around this earth in an unconscious state.
Yeah.
And every time we spend our time engaged in numbing activities to an excessive degree, not saying those things are bad, but to an excessive, almost addictive degree, to addictive meaning specifically to numb ourselves from feeling and thinking, that is a problem.
Yeah,
And that is the
totally.
first problem that needs to be solved, is a
Yeah.
lack of consciousness and awareness.
Yep. Oh, I love that. I love our discussion. Wow. Oh. And last week I recorded a session with Sophie. So for
Oh, yeah.
listeners and viewers, it was Sophie Krantz we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
and you'll hear her as well on this podcast. So, Winnie, that's been such a great conversation, and I so appreciate it. I'd love to get you back on my next season as well and just continue the conversation, because I love your perspectives, I love your viewpoint, and I totally agree that the numbing, the unawareness, if we want to create a beautiful life, create a beautiful world, we all need to get more conscious, get more aware, and work with others and get uncomfortable in those problems to actually work towards fixing them. So it's been an absolute pleasure having you, and an honour having you on today's session. Thank you so much. We will share all your details in the information where the podcast and also the video of the podcast are sent out. Is there anything else you wanted to finish up with before we finish?
Yeah, and that is, thank you so much for having me and having the opportunity to share a little bit about what I've been thinking and reflecting on with your listeners.
Nice.
And thank you. I want to acknowledge you for your wonderful, such a kindness about you, and just such a gentleness for you that, for others, that you have this unique ability to like hold space for others and to support them and champion them. And I want to acknowledge you in that as well. And because there are not many people like you, like in Danette, in the world. So thank you for being such a beautiful presence in my life, and for the opportunity to collaborate with you and share.
Alrighty. Well, Danette, that was a great conversation. So good to talk to Winitha again, and as someone who edited the podcast, great to see her again.
Yes.
I guess before we now every week we have a listener question, but before we get into that, I mean, we've got to have some thoughts on the conversation you just had with Winitha. So, did you have anything you kind of wanted to talk to the listeners about?
Yeah, couple of points. So the first one was, who are you inviting to the table, and are they at the main table or perhaps a side table? Which means we're not really picking up those voices. I also like that if we want to create psychological safety, as leaders need to admit that we don't have all the answers. We need to make it safe for others to ask those questions. And I really liked her Madam C.J. Walker story about creating better stories and more diverse stories in order to be able to collaborate and problem solve. So they were my key takeaways, Jess.
Yeah, I mean, one for me was definitely how Winitha was talking about how we've built a system that can't really handle stress, which is obviously not super sustainable. And I thought that was a really good point. And I think also the first thing to sort of changing, and also, again, sort of included in this diversity and inclusion, is really about innovation and collaboration and understanding different people, understanding where they're coming from. And so you get a broader spectrum of sort of understanding how you can sell to people and also what needs are met. One of the things that Winitha says is, like you were talking about before we got into the conversation, you have to admit that there's a problem. If you're right, if you're looking around and everyone's looking the same, well, you're only going to be able to see problems that are affected those people around the table. So,
yes.
A lot of other people are dealing with a lot of other problems that you're going to be totally blind to, or opportunities that you'll be blind to as well.
Yes.
So I definitely thought that was what a great conversation, you know?
It was fabulous. So now let's talk about the listener question for today.
Yes. So this one's from Jenna. Now, everybody, I'm going to try a new feature. So obviously you might notice the audio quality is a little higher. We're recording this on Riverside, which is a sort of new podcasting thing. And I recommend it for a lot of people. I know a lot of people are starting to use this. But I'm going to try the teleprompter feature, which I've never tried before.
Ooh.
So hopefully this works.
We're innovating, Jez.
We're innovating. So this question is from Jenna. And here's Jenna's question for you, Danette. Says, I'm gearing up to be a first-time manager, which is something I've been wanting for ages and have finally gotten the opportunity. I'll be overseeing 2 people, a junior and a mid-level, and I'm very, very concerned with making sure I do this right. I've had pretty bad managers throughout my career, the types of people who saw the position as a level up for themselves versus a chance to help and nurture someone's career. And then they put in brackets, I work in an industry that's a real boys' club, close brackets. I care quite a bit about helping to grow talent. So I'm wondering what qualities or even processes have the best managers used with you? Any insight is helpful. Thank you.
I love that. And I would say for Jenna, first of all, one thing she could do straight up is reflect on the good and the bad managers she's had and what the differences were between them. I definitely encourage her to be curious, because through curiosity, she's going to be able to create that psychological safety for the team members so that they will feel safer sharing their ideas with her as well. And when they bring diversity of thoughts, ideas, innovation, etc. to the team, not only to thank them for it, but actually to celebrate it as well, so that she's encouraging them to bring their strengths and their diversity of talent into the team. I'd also be keen for her to chat to them about what are their ways or their thoughts about how we could collaborate and grow a stronger team, and particularly what do they think their particular strengths are. One of the things I love is, when we notice people's strengths, we can utilise them. That makes a person feel better at work. They bring more of themselves. So I'd encourage that as well. And I think one of the things that Winitha talked about, which is really, really important, is being transparent. So again, if she's not sure, Jenna should be saying, hey, team, I'm not sure about this. Anyone got any ideas on how we move forward on this? And again, then recognising those and celebrating the contributions of the other team members.
100%. And Jenna, thank you for sending that one in. I just want to echo what Danette said. And I also think that the fact that you're even considering this question is already a great sign, totally. Because a bad manager probably wouldn't see this as something that they need to be concerned with.
Yes.
So I think it's already a great sign. I think all you can do is really reflect on good managers and bad managers. We've all had bad managers, and bad managers, I think we've talked about this on previous episodes and certainly on the Magical Learning podcast,
yes.
But it seems like the biggest difference between good managers and bad managers is a combination of training and trust.
Yes.
If you don't feel like you haven't been trained properly as an employee, then it's hard to have good trust in your employees as well if you're an employer. And at the same time, if you're an employee and someone's sort of always on your back and doesn't trust you, you can feel so restricted, and it can feel quite confining. You're never going to do your best work where you're constantly wondering, you can't make mistakes because someone's watching and ready to critique. So I think, Jenna, it looks like you're going to be doing pretty well. I think obviously you're going to make mistakes, but everyone does, and it's just about how you can get back from that. And as long as you've got good intentions, I think you'll be doing pretty well.
Yeah, and I'd encourage Jenna when she makes mistakes to share that with the team and go, let's use this as a learning exercise, because that's totally what psychological safety does.
Absolutely. Well, Danette, before we go from this episode, did you have anything else you wanted to share about either the conversation with Winnie, building safe workplaces for better innovation and collaboration, or anything else we've talked about?
I think the thing is, we're never going to be perfect, so don't try to be perfect. Be okay with making mistakes, sharing that with others, but also looking for the insights that others have. And one of the things I love about when we do diversity and inclusion really well, people actually want to come to work and share their viewpoints, which will be a totally different perspective from your perspective. So it makes you smarter when we do diversity and inclusion really well.
Absolutely. Well, again, I wanted to highlight that this is a companion podcast to the amazing book, The Adaptable Leader, 7 Skills to Help You Succeed During Uncertainty. Danette highlighted those at the start of the episode. If you liked this episode, you can also watch it on YouTube, or if you're watching it on YouTube right now, you can check it out on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. The exciting thing that we're doing this season with YouTube is that you can actually watch it as a premiere, so you can watch it live as it's being released. That happens at midday Australian Eastern Standard Time on YouTube, so feel free to jump on over there. You can live comment. We'll react if you're watching it. So feel free to join us there for the next episode, which is going to be very exciting. But anyway, Danette, that's pretty much it from us today, I think. So
I was going to say, is it Thursday that it's midday?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Good point. Yes, it is on Thursdays at midday.
And so to everyone, thanks, Jez, and to everyone, stay adaptable.